Hey. Welcome to episode one. No. Welcome to episode 263 of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Freeman, and today we are talking about inclusion, and it can, even for me who has a disability. I have a speech impediment, a prominent speech impediment, and some coordination differences as a result of a birth injury. Even for me, this term can be kind of abstract sometimes, but I was thinking about it as I prepared this morning, and every aspect of the life I live now, the success I enjoy now, the book, this podcast. I have a speech impediment, for heaven's sakes, and I'm at episode 263 of a podcast. And I make a living as a speaker with a speech impediment. Every aspect of my success is based on being included by ordinary people. It's really quite overwhelming to think about. Anyway, my guest today has dedicated her life to helping workplaces create and organizations create inclusion, and helping people like me with disabilities envision themselves as being included in life. Before I bring her on, let me read one of her quotes. When you have someone at the table with a disability, you quickly see how they navigate a world that's not designed for them. They are problem solvers. They've had to learn to organize so many aspects of their lives. They see dimensions to our world we might be oblivious to. Let's bring on our guest, but first, this.
Today's guest, Lisa Drennan.
Hey, Lisa, welcome to Awkwardly Awesome Podcast.
Jason, that was the most awesome intro that I've ever had. Love that. And I have to ask you the title of your podcast, Awkwardly Awesome. I just love that. And I don't know where that came from, but I'm sure you'll share that in our conversation.
Yeah. Let's read that in. Thanks. But first, Lisa, today we're talking about inclusion and including people with different disabilities. Would you talk a little bit about the enormous, just almost the mind-boggling range of disabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, the title of my company is technically Merge Abilities Inclusion Consulting. And I thought about that for a long time, like what, through my career and what I had learned and listening to people. And when I think about diverse abilities, what I think about is thinking about a crowd of people, right? So I have a group or a class or a team in front of me, and there's a very good likelihood that several people in that group or class are going to learn differently or participate, or they might experience the world around them differently. And that might be impacted by, it could be a physical disability, learning disability. It could be behavioral challenges, social emotional issues. It could be neurological, maybe an intellectual or developmental disability, and of course, hidden disabilities, which, statistics show that 70% of disabilities are hidden or non-apparent. So
That's amazing. 70%.
70%, right? So just looking at a group of 10 people who are now, part of your team or your group or your work environment, you want to think about setting up the environment and the culture that it works for everybody right out of the box, right? So that's kind of when I think about all those different disabilities, that's the way that I want the world to think. How can we create a world that it would be welcoming and engaging and help all members of our community to belong, right? Physical disability, intellectual, developmental, the whole range. And I do recognize, and I know language is a big thing, and I try to listen really well to the disability community, that some people prefer the word disability, but some do not. They might prefer another word, challenge, differences. I just want to honor that there are different ways that people would prefer language. So that's why I use diverse abilities, but I also make it very clear that there's nothing wrong with saying the word disability. Because when I teach audiences, often they're like, can we say that word? And it's like, yes, no, a disability, but just the choice is the person, the individual, what they prefer for language.
At once it's very exciting. The huge range of disabilities. The image of a rainforest comes to mind, and how intricate the ecosystem is, and how many different plants and animals and birds and insects are in it.
Yeah.
But on another hand, I can see where that may be overwhelming for an organization, because I can see an organization maybe saying, oh, we can upgrade, we can get the appropriate wheelchair ramps in the parking places. We get that, but trying to accommodate this huge range, how do you prepare organizations for the simple vastness of inclusion?
No, absolutely. And that's a great question, because often I might get a little overwhelmed. I need to know everything about every disability, but you know what? I don't. What I need to know is that I have an open mind and an open heart, and we're going to make it work, right? We're going to make it work. So you try to have a culture or an environment where we're very thoughtful of building spaces that work for all different types of disabilities. But here's the thing. Until you have, one person who comes in who has a limb difference, or another person who has a mobility issue, right? Or another one who is experiences neurological differences, right? Or neurodivergent, or until you hit a situation where the vast number of disabilities can approach, then my answer is, then you just listen to that person, because we all know, as I say this, if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. The same thing with somebody who utilizes a wheelchair. One may have push themselves, they might use it part of the time. Someone might have an electric one, right? A mobile device. So it can vary, and it just depends on the person. So yes, we have an open mind, but here's the other thing, is that when any individual comes, we just listen to their story and learn what are the supports they need. Then we make it work. So I don't have to be an expert in everything, because sometimes I'm constantly trying to learn, but I can get overwhelmed, right? There's so many disabilities and so many terms and things to learn and study, but I'm just going to take it person by person is the way that I would approach situations like a community organization.
When you say one person with autism, one person with autism. What do you mean by that statement?
Oh, yeah, good question. And thanks for asking me to clarify that. So, every person is so different. And
Mm.
if you know one person, I know Bob, and he has autism, and this is what he does. That means everybody with autism does that, right? And it's not true. It's just so everybody is so different, right? Um, communication differences as well, and yeah, it just means that that's what that person experiences. So this person over here, maybe Devante over here, has a whole different experience, and Emily, another person who identifies as having autism, has an entirely different experience of the world. So it's kind of honoring everybody's own diversity within that neurodiversity, if that makes sense.
Such an important point.
Yeah.
And speaking of your and uniqueness of a disability, uh, um, it reminds me of a story from my own life. At a certain point, I had graduated from grad school, but I was still miserably stressed out. And suddenly it came to my mind that my dear aunt and uncle said 6 months before, Jason, you should try yoga. At the time, I'm like, whoa. In my mind, I'm like, what? I have a disability. I don't do yoga. No, do yoga. But 6 months later, I was so miserable. I walked down to my local Sioux Falls YMCA
Yeah.
and started taking yoga classes. I didn't think about this at the time, but when I walked into that first yoga class with that first yoga teacher, I mean, she probably was not expecting me at all
Mhm.
on that day, but luckily, it transformed my life. It's the reason we're talking now. Luckily, she made me feel welcome. Luckily, she helped me create adaptations.
Mhm.
Luckily, she left me with the idea that, hey, yoga was interesting. And not only that, hey, I could do it.
That's amazing. That just warms my heart. And bravo, and whoever that is at the yoga instructor at your YMCA, well done, because that's the culture. That's the invitation and the welcome that we want for every person, every individual. And I think that just makes me so happy. I'm so glad you shared that. Appreciate that.
So the work you do with organizations like literally helps thousands of people tell the story I just told you.
I love that. Yeah, and that's what I do. I work with YMCA's primarily. I have a Y background myself, so I understand Ys and how it works. I work with rec departments, sport organizations, libraries, faith organizations, businesses. So, really, what I say is any group or entity that offers something for the general public, I teach them how to be more welcoming, engaging, and supportive of individuals with disabilities or diverse abilities. So, when you mentioned something, and I just have to tell this story because it is so powerful. You mentioned the impact and how it can spread to thousands of people, right? And that
Mm.
is true. I got a call, I'm going to say about a month ago, right? And it was just a random call on my cell phone. And when I'm working, you have to kind of answer all the phone calls, even though there might be spam. And you're like, oh, but it wasn't a number I recognized. So I was like, hello, this is Lisa from Merge. And a woman started talking to me, and I thought, oh, she's going to start selling something, right? But she said, I just had to find you, and I want to thank you. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a Merge call. And she said, you've changed my life. I
Mm.
had no idea who she was. So she explained, she told me her name. She told me about her daughter. And I had been working with the recreation department in Billings, Montana for a couple of
Mhm.
years doing their staff trainings, and oh man, they were awesome. There's just some
Mm.
groups that they came to the table like, teach us, we want to know more, and they just listened so attentively, and they had that open mind and they had that open heart, and they just made inclusion work for their city, for their community members.
Mm.
So what had happened is her daughter had various disabilities, and she had doors shut in her face over and over and over again. Like, nope, sorry, we can't. Oh, we don't know how to work with somebody like that, because she had a little bit more complex needs.
Mm.
And she said she went to Billings, Montana, and their recreation department. So yay, guys over there. They were
Mm.
awesome. And their response was, how can we help you? Not, oh, I don't think we can do this. Their response was, how can we help you? So this woman was calling me saying because of that, her daughter was now playing tennis. She was
Mm.
accepted. She was felt valued. Plus she got to participate in, like you, something that was good for her body and her mind and her soul. And I just, I, yeah, I got off the phone call. I was teary. I'm gonna be honest. I was like choking up talking to her because
Mhm.
here's this woman I don't even know or never met, and saying, "You changed my life. You changed my daughter's life," and I was just blown away. It was pretty amazing. Yeah.
That's goosebumpy, brings tears to my eyes. That call was definitely not spam, Lisa.
No, it was not spam. I was so glad. I like came close to doing one of those, like, oh, is it spam? Should I? But she's like, hello, I'm looking for Lisa Drennan, and those are usually the spam. But it was the best call that I could have ever received. It really did. It moved me, and it fueled me because what I work hard. I work hard. I believe I mentioned I do not have a disability. I don't identify as having a disability, but I've spent my whole life as an ally and an advocate, and learning and listening to the disability community. But I'm out there doing the work, and it's tiring. I travel around the country, and there's times where, I just keep wanting to do more. And there's so much going on in the world right now that is kind of making it harder for folks with disabilities here in America. And I want to fight harder, but I do get tired sometimes. But I get a phone call like that, and that charges my batteries. And I'm like, let's go fight, and that's kind of what I took from that call too. Not just it was good for my heart, but it was good to fuel my batteries and keep doing this work that I believe is very important.
When you say the word fight, what do you mean? Because fight can mean a lot of things. It can mean going into battle with a gun. It just has so many things fight can mean. What
Yeah.
do you mean by the word fight?
So when I say that, I'm usually thinking about, and no offense to my wonderful other family members, dads or whatnot, and other family members, but mama bears is the term I use, right? Because I work a lot with maybe school parent organizations called CPACs, right? So, and they are 99.9% females, women who are fighting for their children. They're fighting for the right of their children or their teens or adults, right? Whether it doesn't always have to be like young children. When a family member has somebody with a disability, and especially when they're children and they need your advocacy, they have to fight. They have to fight for every right because doors are just constantly slammed in their faces, right? And you may have experienced some of that yourself. No, we can't. Sorry, just a lot of no's. And I kind of feel like I'm in that fight together with them to open up minds, but in a very pleasant way. Like not the kind of fight like I'm going to fight you or be angry about things. I'm just going to take that energy and move forward this movement, right? Move it forward on behalf of all the families are too busy because they've got their children or other
Mm.
family members that they are fighting for. And I've listened to hundreds of thousands of people share their stories with me, and like if I still have the energy, I'm going to keep on doing this work and keep on fighting for a more just, a more equitable right, societies that work for everybody.
So if you're talking with a parent of a child who experiences a disability,
Yeah.
how will you counsel them to fight effectively?
Well, I think I use this analogy of a bridge, right? And merging together people with and without disabilities, because I want to see a world where people with disabilities are valued members of the community, right? They're valued members of a work environment, a YMCA class, somebody who's, wants to be part of a book club or whatever the situation is. And, you know, the bridge analogy comes from, here's the disability community. Individuals with disabilities, families who support them, maybe even agencies like the ARC or other agencies that support folks with different disabilities. And here's the rest of the world, right? And historically, folks with disabilities have been segregated, right? Whether intentional or not, they've been segregated from good parts of our community. If you go back not too long ago in history, like when I was alive, they were institutionalized, right? Folks with more intellectual developmental disabilities and people with physical disabilities have had to fight for the right for, just access into buildings, onto public transportation, and so on. And so here's the rest of the world, right? And they have historically seen like, oh, well, people with disabilities have their own staff or their own people, or their families take care. They have their own groups, don't they? And it's not the way that that I don't think benefits our communities the way it should. I feel that folks over here in the general community and then people with disabilities have constantly been trying to, like cross that bridge and be part of that community. And it's not until this side lays down and kind of forms this partnership together that they want to work together with people with and without disabilities to be able to have a choice that you could go into a yoga class with everybody else, right? That somebody who utilizes a wheelchair is welcome in this work environment and shares their, maybe they're into IT, right? And they share that there, that people are welcomed into their faith communities and other recreation opportunities. So I kind of see that, merge is like, creating together. But this side, the community, I feel that most people want to do better at being more inclusive. They just don't know how. And because of that historical, well, they've always had their own programs, their own schools, their own homes, their own separated from the rest of the world. Well, it wasn't our responsibility. And now we are realizing the benefits of inclusion for everybody. And that's what I do. I help give this side of the bridge a little bit more and tools and confidence so that they can. Now, back to the families, your original question, it also takes education on their end as well, because I'll just share a story. I have a family member who I was introduced to, and they didn't want their child going into typical or traditional swim classes. They were afraid they would get made fun of, or something would happen, or they wouldn't be supported, or would fail, and then that would cause a lot more anxiety for their child. And when we kind of educated her on not only the benefits, but that it is possible to try an inclusive offering, but we're going to take steps to get there, right? So we worked together with the Y and with her, and it was really beautiful to have her kind of let down her defenses, thinking my kid always has to be in these special classes just with kids like her. And that wasn't always the case, that sometimes that might be preferred, but we have to educate on both sides of that bridge, right? We have to educate even agencies that support folks with disabilities. Often they don't see what authentic inclusion could possibly be. So there has to be a lot of education. So that's how I would start, working with any family member, making sure that they have, I always say, a choice but an educated choice. And we're going to help support you on that way, so that maybe it's going to start as a specialized class with instruction with just 2 or 3 kids with disabilities, but then they're going to move up to, having, a better, stronger ratios. And then they're going to go to a typical class with the support that was built in until they go to a typical class, because they're great swimmers and they want to swim like everybody else. They don't always have to be segregated or separated. So yeah.
It occurs to me that type of fighting and that type of creativity and that type of step-by-step approach can lead to a very much a win-win situation.
100%. And I like to say that because sometimes when people hear the word inclusion, they think, oh, that's for those people who have disabilities. Inclusion, actually, think about the word for a second. Inclusion can only be done by community entities or other people in the community, whether it's a work environment, a YMCA class, a little league team, scouts, right? Like I said, book club. So the inclusion can only be done by the rest of the world, or people without disability saying you are welcomed here and opening their doors, right? So with that being said, inclusion is a win-win situation. It isn't just making, it good. It's good for kids, teens, adults with disabilities. No, it's actually good for other people without disabilities, right? To learn a little bit, I know I'm constantly learning from people with disabilities when I see, the worlds they have to navigate, and I kind of like understand their travels, their journeys a little bit more. I'm learning from them. Everybody's learning together, and they bring something to the table that might be a little different, right? That could be a different perspective that nobody has thought about, or a different way of navigating, or how could we, like learning. I always say, when you're thinking of creating inclusive environments, make sure you're asking people with disabilities what would work for them, so that their voice is heard. And then the end result is everybody, people with or without disabilities, whether it's an invisible disability or a visible one, it doesn't matter. Everybody benefits. All the staff, your yoga instructor, other people in your yoga class, everyone benefits from inclusion and inclusion strategies. So, for instance, I'll give an example of camp. And I suggest that every camp uses something called the visual schedule. And it's just a visual tool, and it's going to look different for kids than it would for adults. But for kids, it's going to have like a picture of archery or a picture of art class or swim time or lunch, and to review that with the whole group as a whole, with everybody involved at the beginning of every day, because that helps a lot of kids who are trying to learn. They're trying to, what's expected of them, and decrease some of their anxieties, or for them to know and plan ahead of time what's coming up next. That's just one of 8 strategies that I teach. But here's the thing. They're not just good for kids who might have a disability. So I wouldn't say, as a camp counselor, oh, everybody with autism, come on over here. We're going to go over the visual schedule. You use it for everybody, because here's the thing. It actually benefits everyone. And I think we've learned a lot about that, when we think about, DEI and some of the unfortunate attacks on DEI. When you really break down what DEI does, diversity, equity, inclusion, it creates better worlds for everybody, right? It's why we have curb cuts. It's why we have but I use the curb cuts all the time. I'm always like juggling 1,000 things, or if I'm, riding my bike or whatnot, using a curb cut is a good thing. I suppose if I were pushing a stroller, things like that those inclusive elements or universal design on how to make things work, everybody benefits from it. You don't have to have a disability to use that curb cut, or, screen readers, things like that. I use closed captions sometimes, because I just, I can put it up real big, and it helps me to see or hear if I'm not hearing things correctly. Works for me. So it's a win-win. Inclusion is a win-win.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking how much I love having closed captions now during movies. It helps a great deal.
It does, especially if sometimes I like a lot of Irish things, and sometimes I'm listening to a movie, and like as much I go there often and visit, and I can understand, the language, the thick brogue sometimes, especially if, from Belfast or Dublin, or sometimes I'm like, what are they saying? And to have it on closed caption, I'm like, oh, that's what they said, because I just didn't understand what the word was that they were saying because of the, just a different dialect or brogue that might occur.
And that really makes a world that you love, Ireland,
Mhm.
more accessible to you. That's a wonderful example.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can, definitely understand and not be the one who wasn't getting that joke, because I'm like, what do they say? So I can see it on the movie and I can follow along a little bit better, until I catch on. And then maybe I don't need it the whole time, but I like having the option there. I often put that on myself because it just helps me to kind of follow along too.
I want to, and you mentioned this briefly before that your journey with inclusive thinking and inclusive creativity started very young. Would you please talk a little about your? But there was a family friend who experienced a disability when you
Yeah,
were young.
I really do credit that experience in giving me a different mindset. So, my family, we have a family of 8, and my parents had best friends, and then they had their children. And one of their children, she had developmental disabilities. And she was just around for everything that was occurring, whether it be family cookouts and whatnot, and always treated with just respect. I didn't really see it as anything different, right? She talked a little differently, and she was slower, to understand sometimes. So, like, this is me being a kid growing up, and but she was just like everyone. She was included like everyone else. She wasn't, like sent away or couldn't come with us. Had to go to her own, parties or places or whatnot. She was just part of the family, and it just didn't occur to me that it was anything different, So now move forward, and I had the opportunity, when I was 17 years old. I started working at a place nearby where I live, and it was a residential community for adults with intellectual developmental disabilities.
What do you think prompted you to go apply for a job there? You could,
Um,
I mean,
yeah.
obviously, there's fast food, grocery stores, on and on.
Yeah, yeah. I think someone mentioned it to me that they were looking for help, and I immediately thought, see, I didn't think of it like I'm good at this or I'm comfortable at this, because I was just that way. I don't know. And it wasn't until I started working there that I did realize that I'm I have this nature about me that is, really works well. Number one, treat people with respect. That was my, like, came in the door knowing that, and just knowing how important that was. And through my career, I often thought about our family friend and how I this is the way I approached my job. So my first job was direct support professional. They didn't, that's a nice title now. We were just called staff at the time, and you would help with daily living things, right? And it could be making breakfast or whatnot, or, different things like that, going out, going on, outings into the community and driving the van. Here I am, 17, 18 years old, going, oh my God, I was like, 6 men and women here that I'm responsible for. That was kind of wild. But, I just realized that it wasn't even just comfortable. It was just how I was. And I always kept her in the back of my mind, because I thought the way that I interact with these men and women is how I would want people to interact with our friend. right?
Mm.
And that stuck with me
Mm.
for so long because, I'm just going to be honest, working in the field, there were some people who took a different approach to what their job was. They're very militant, or you have to do this, or more things that made me very, very uncomfortable.
Mm.
Even at the age of 17, I was like
Mm.
questioning 25-year-olds or 30-something-year-olds, like,
Mm.
that's not okay. Like, why are you raising your voice? I knew that I knew
Mm.
what worked on how to interact with somebody with a disability. Just listen, treat them with respect, and offer choice. All those good things that became part of who I am and what I do nowadays, and it really did make a difference. And it wasn't until I had my own children, right? So I'm going to kind of make up it's a story, but I'm gonna ad lib a little bit here. So we had a mother of one of the residents who lived there, and she liked certain things with her son, like his fingernails cut really nicely, like make sure he was always clean, and that to me was like, yeah, of course. Like, why, um but not all of the staff who work there felt that way. They thought like she's kind of being picky or pain, and I was like, no, it wasn't until I had my own children, and the first time, like, I left, my son and my daughter and son alone with somebody for, to go away. And I was like, can you make sure you do her hair really nice and put the little bows here and make sure Jared's, shirt is clean. And I was thinking, yeah, that's the same, that like, I felt that same, as a parent, you want, if you're not there, you want your child, and I don't care if they're 6 years old, 36 or 86, you want them to be treated with respect. And we have to, to me, we had to be a little bit more mindful of that when it came to people with intellectual developmental disabilities, because they may not speak up themselves. They may not realize that they've got, a stain on their shirt. And if we're going out to the movies, you don't want to have a stain. Like, just give a cue to, would you like to change your shirt? Things like that, just common human dignity that was
Mm.
embedded in everything that I learned, that I started to create my own vision of, what are best practices. I remember being very young working at this place and going to the CEO and saying, we really need to have consistency on how people, he probably was like, who are you? But I just thought we have to have consistency. You have some staff who interact in really not kind ways and just kind of like getting through their day and not really
Mm.
considering this person as an individual. And here are some things that I think are really important, offering choice, involving them in decision making. And like, I knew that as this at a young age, and there were some people who worked there who were just kind of old school, and they just thought, nope, you just lay down the law and the rule, and they just were very militant about things, and I didn't, or not kind, not saying like abusive or anything, but just not as kind as they could have been. And those were standards that I carry through and I teach now. When we think about working with folks more with intellectual developmental disabilities, here are the things you want to consider that somebody may not like. You don't baby them. They're not, I always thought, okay, here I am, 17, 18, 19, maybe even 20s. And I'm working with men and women who are in their 30s and 40s. And I'm thinking, they're older than me. There has to be like a respect thing like that. I still carried that respect. Like, it doesn't matter if they have a developmental disability or not. They're older than me and they have lived longer than me. And I just wanted to respect that and
Mm.
respect their ability to make choices and not do things for them, but encourage them to learn how to, improve some of the skills that they were working on themselves. Right. So, or just have a good quality of life. That was basically, so it's very young when I discovered all that, but it followed me through my career, and it helps weave into what I teach today. So yeah, story.
Advocacy is about having a voice and finding, probably about finding the courage to use a voice. What do you think, Lisa, gave you the courage to go to the CEO
I
of the
know.
organization at 17?
I know. I was, I just thought, I have a choice here to either follow along with how some things are not okay in my world, or what I was seeing from my lens, and I have a choice to speak up. And I just knew that, well, you have to speak up, because if things aren't okay, I just kept going back to our family friend. If somebody was talking to her in that way, or not offering choice, or doing things for her, or kind of like, well, if you don't do this, you're not going to get that, like taking those kind of old school approaches, I wouldn't want anybody treating her that way. And then eventually, as I had kids, I would not, if that were my son or daughter, how would I want people speaking to them? And that's what gave me the courage, because I felt like I had a responsibility. And I've always been a very forward thinking, like I'm always thinking, if something doesn't work, then you need to change it. You need to make efforts to change it. And I've never shied away from that. And I've always thought, like, way into the future. If something doesn't exist, well, then make it. Like, I had never met anybody who does my work, right? But I recognize this is important work. When I was working at a YMCA and I was the director of inclusion, I was realizing, as I was helping somebody, it could have been a camp counselor, it could have been a yoga instructor, somebody who works at front desk, and I was helping them, right, to have more tools and confidence. I was thinking, this is important work, and I want to do more of this. I want to go around the country and do this. So I had that, I don't know, I guess you call it courage, guts, to just say, okay, this is what I was meant to do. And that's what I did.
Well, thank you. It's amazing. I love it. Love your philosophy. If something doesn't work, change it. If something hasn't been created yet, create it.
Yeah. I was saying, lead, follow, or get out of my way. I just kind of I'm going to do things, and I've always had that kind of approach. Just let's get things done, right? Let's move and make a better world for everybody. And if I don't know, I guess I was blessed with a unique background or experience, and even maybe everybody said your personality. That's part of it too. I'm very patient and kind and thoughtful in that way. So that came into play, right? Always try to listen to people. You try your best. And I just happen to have some of those skills that I grew up with. So I guess I was kind of lucky. Find my thing.
A word that came up so much in as you were talking in the last 10 minutes about was friend.
Yeah.
Your friend when you were young. And that's an aspect of inclusion we really haven't touched specifically on yet. But so loneliness is an epidemic right now. An epidemic is just huge health consequences. And it occurs to me that people who experience the range of disabilities, I mean, aside from everything else, having different ideas, and stuff like that, they can be friends. They have the capacity to be friends. Can you say more about that?
Yes, this is a topic that I'm actually extremely passionate about. So part of inclusion, right? When we think about inclusion, what I teach is, it's not just, say you teach a yoga class, it's not just about making it accessible, right? And not just about making it inclusive. So accessible is somebody has access to information, space, buildings, and programs. Inclusion is that they have access to do that with other people with and without disabilities, right? They don't have to be separated. But inclusion isn't enough. belonging is where we want to be. So I have a new training. It's called Belonging is the New Inclusion, right? That we want to go a step further, and we want to make somebody feel like they're part of a class, they're contributing, they're valued, right? Their information, or I mean, their participation is very valued. And an outcome of belonging might be friendship. And just so happens, and I don't even know if I told you this, but I'm the author of this book called Building Friendships Between People with and Without Disabilities. So it's a toolkit for community, recreation, cultural, and faith organizations. Now,
Wow.
this is a project from the ARC of Massachusetts and DDS Department of Developmental Services in Massachusetts. It's called Pathways to Friendship, and this is one of 5 toolkits. I happen to write this one. The first 4 were written for people with disability, people who work with people with disabilities. So it could be DSPs or direct support professionals. It could have been, teachers, educators. It was written for family members, right? How to help an individual with disabilities go out and access the world. And then when they met me and they heard about my work, because I live in Massachusetts, and I explained, yeah, I work with that other side of the bridge. I teach these people over here how to be more inclusive. And this is the natural next step, not just being inclusive, but how can you create an environment, right? And that could help foster a natural friendship, right? So reciprocal, it's really important. It's got to be reciprocal friendship between a person with and without disabilities. And I'm not talking about will you paid to be a friend or volunteer to be a friend, when it's created naturally because of common interest. So you might go to your yoga class and you might end up meeting, someone going up for coffee afterwards because you have a lot of common interest. And that's the type of thinking that I want community organizations to take it to the next level. If you're an instructor, you're a coach, you're a teacher, you're you run a business, whatever the case may be, you want to be thinking about maybe helping to encourage, right? One simple thing. We learned that so-and-so really likes the Red Sox. So-and-so really likes the Red Sox. Maybe we mention, hey, did you know that so-and-so really also likes the Red Sox? So little things like that and strategies that we can do. And that's all covered in this book. And I'll send you the link so that you're able to share and people can download a copy of it. But it is written for community entities, like somebody who, again, recreation, maybe they're involved in their church, or they're involved with, cultural or other community organizations. It's written for them because, as you mentioned, loneliness is a epidemic, and people with disabilities at a higher rate for experiencing loneliness and isolation. And we can do better by welcoming them into being part of things that interest, right, them, right? What is somebody? So now what we do is we shift the narrative on, instead of being deficit focused, we are strengths focused. So you like yoga, you're good at yoga, right? We want to focus on that, not your disability, right? So when we can identify what makes somebody shine, what are they great at? What do they love? We can start focusing on those strengths, building them up, and then they have an increased opportunity or increased chance of meeting somebody with a similar interest, and they're more likely to meaningfully contribute, right? So that they are valued members of the community. This isn't, and I don't like this word, but it isn't a pity thing, or we have to, isn't this nice that we do this? No, you do it because it's the right thing to do. It's a win-win, and it helps. Now we're going to see a view or a vision from someone else's perspective, and they're part of the group, and that's valued. They're going to contribute in ways that are valuable to the whole group, and maybe they're going to make a friend, an authentic, reciprocal friendship that will, we know what friendships can do, right? They can help with that loneliness, isolation. They can help us, to celebrate the good times in life, but also deal with struggles that we might be going through. That's what friends do. And everybody should have the opportunity at real meaningful friendships, and not just with, people with the same disability, because often that ends up happening too, but just with another person who also has common interests. So the focus is on common interests, because that's how I make my friends. I'm sure that's how you make your friends. You have common interests, and that's the goal of this toolkit. So I'm so glad you asked.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm so glad I asked you. I can see people in this busy world saying, kind of thinking, and sometimes I think this too. Well, I just don't have time for another friend. But then I think about it, and in those friends I have friends who I interact with half an hour a month, or friends I go a few months without talking to, and then talk to, and they're still friends. I still value them in my life.
Right.
Having a friend doesn't mean we have to be together for the next 8 hours.
No, no, we all have that. Like, I have my friends when I want to go out and see a band. I have my certain friends that I will go and, reach out to them because they're that kind of people. I have my friends who are going to do the more adventurous stuff. Like, you want to come bike riding with me? We're going to go mountain biking. So I have friends in that category. I have friends who are, just kind of like family to me. So I would maybe invite them to our family cookout, things like that. So yeah, you have friends in different pockets, and I don't know, I always think there's always room for more friends. You can, everybody feels loneliness at some times, and it's just nice to have somebody to reach out to, and I think that's one of the benefits of friendship. So I always like to say, shouldn't everybody have that opportunity to make and have friends and be a valued friend too? It isn't just about doing something for them, it's about that they're a valued friend.
Mm. I think of all the people who value me as a friend, and
Yeah.
it really has friendship has transformed my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's really important. And I think when you share that, somebody else is listening. And I always think it's very important to show what's possible, because someone might be, younger and thinking, oh, I'll never have a friend. But then they hear you say that, and, maybe they stutter, maybe they have a speech impediment, what have you. And they might say, Jason did it. I could have a friend too. When you show what's possible, you're opening up the realm of possibilities for people. So I think it's important that you shared that. I appreciate it.
Mm. Um. What, you are an avid photographer. You talk about storytelling photography.
Mhm.
What has your photography taught you about inclusion?
Oh, like my own hobby of photography? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting question. And I like to capture the world around me. So um, I usually like to look at beautiful things that somebody may not, consider as particularly beautiful. But if I see something and it reminds me of a time like this, a couple of days ago, I went to Newport, Rhode Island with my daughter, and we are just sitting in this little cafe, and she left to, go use the restroom. And it was just a really beautiful view out the window. And there was this little candle by the table. Had a corner view, and you could see the house across the street, which was beautiful. And I just kind of framed it and took a photo, and now that'll remind me of that time with her. So I also think it shows, like, I'm not a professional photographer, but I spend time finding things that are beautiful in my eyes, and I take a picture of it. And I've learned a couple things. Like I use my iPhone. I don't have a big old fancy camera. Someday maybe I will, because I'd like to do that. But I think it proves that if you love something, just do it. You don't have to be a professional at it. And I take pictures of all things when I travel, and I travel the country a lot. And I like I'm gonna listen to this, picture of the I did today. Comment on me.
What?
Like, oh, I feel you're so adventurous. That's kind of cool. So anybody can do that. You have any kind of passion, whether be painting, writing, photography. Follow what makes you feel good, because it does make me feel good when I get a nice shot and I'm like, oh, that's beautiful. And then I just shared it with somebody who maybe they don't have the opportunity to go to Arizona, but now they can see through my lens. So I don't know if that really ties into inclusion. I think it does, because it shows that, just follow, what you love and let that shine. Right. So I like that.
Awesome. The connection is getting little shaky for a minute. So last question. And what does doing your imperfect best mean to you? To me, it means I envision the best I want for myself in the world, and I go for it. And when mistakes and obstacles and unknowns come up, instead of letting them stop me, I try to let the learning propel me forward again towards my best. What does doing your imperfect best mean to you?
Oh, doing your imperfect best. Yeah. You know what? We're all going to make errors, and this is one thing that it means to me. Inclusion isn't perfect, right? And I would say this, it's a dial, not a switch. And often when I'm working with someone, they might say, oh, we can't do all this. This is so overwhelming, or we don't know how, right? And I just say, again, back to that. Do you have an open mind? Yep. And an open heart? Yep. Or we can figure out the rest. And it's going to be imperfect. There are going to be hurdles along the way for you as that community organization or the instructor, for the individuals with disabilities and their family members or support agencies. It's not going to be perfect, and that's okay, because eventually we're going to learn how to get over those hurdles, and then everybody's going to benefit once you figure that out. Because inclusion isn't when inclusion is happening, we have to assume there's going to be hurdles, but here's the difference. When there is an obstacle or a hurdle, instead of going, oh, that didn't work, forget it. We shouldn't be doing this, Lisa, it's too much. Instead, what an organization does is they say, that didn't quite work. What could we do to make it better? That's inclusion. So that imperfectness, that's inclusion, because rather than saying, no, you know what, maybe they should go to the swim class, 30 miles away, they take special kids. No, like, let's figure this out. YMCA rec program. And then when they figure it out and they listen to the individual, to their families, and they figure out how to make it work. Because here's the thing. Our worlds were not built for people with disabilities. Our worlds have been designed and built by and for people without disabilities or people who are neurotypical. Right? I think we would all agree on that. And we've slowly been trying to change that. And that's why it's okay if it's imperfect, because we're going to fix it. And then, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that YMCA, that rec program, that sport organization is going to be better at it. So I say, bring on those imperfections. And when we overcome those hurdles, you're leaving a better path for somebody else in the future. So that's my response.
When we overcome those hurdles, we are leaving a better path for someone else in the future. Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Quote it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you so much. And please, I'm going to wrap this up, but please stay on for little bit afterwards. It just takes time for things to upload. Okay.
Absolutely. No, it's my pleasure. Thank you. Great conversation. And I appreciate it. And I appreciate your audience for listening.
Good. Thank you, and thanks everyone for tuning in and thinking about these subjects. I hope you think about them and just talk about this stuff with friends and and be curious about it and like Lisa just said, well, we're not going to get this all perfect all at once, but as we figure this stuff out, it just accumulates and then one day you have things like a podcaster with a speech impediment and coordination differences and
Yeah.
well and most of all thanks for being you because we are each unique, we each have value. You are the best. There's no one else like you on earth. Thanks for being you.
And the same to you, Jason. I appreciate you, and you are the best too. And I'm just, you were an incredible host, and very thoughtful questions that I talked about a few things that I've never talked about on a podcast. So, yay to you! That's good.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Cool. And thanks. And everyone, please tune in for another Awkwardly Awesome podcast next week. And leave comments. Thank you.
Thanks.
And smile.